Imagine this, New York City, 1986. The Bitter End nightclub in Greenwich Village buzzes with anticipation. Cigarette smoke drifts lazily through the air, curling around walls that have absorbed decades of music history. It's the kind of place where legends are made and old rivalries are supposedly laid to rest. That night, Bob Dylan was expected to appear for an impromptu acoustic set, just a handful of songs, nothing too serious. But moments before stepping on stage, someone handed him a note. Just 3 words, a name. Dylan read it, his expression darkened. Without saying a word, he stepped back, turned around with his guitar still slung over his shoulder, and exited through the back door into the cold Manhattan night. He never offered an explanation, not to the club, not to the press, not even to the friend who had invited him. But those closest to him knew. They understood what that name meant and why it still haunted him. Now, at the age of 83, Dylan is finally opening up. After a lifetime of dodging interviews and sidestepping controversy, he's begun revealing the truths long kept in silence. This isn't about revenge or recognition, it's about clarity. And the list he unveils? It's not a roll call of rivals, but of collaborators, icons, and one-time friends. First on that list, Eric Clapton, the guitar virtuoso whose admiration for Dylan gradually morphed into something darker. On the surface, they appeared to be kindred spirits, 2 legends of guitar-driven music who, despite coming from different scenes, spoke the same musical language. They respected each other's craft, performed together at festivals, and shared spontaneous stage moments that fans still remember fondly. Clapton once praised Dylan as the greatest poet in music, while Dylan held Clapton's blues artistry in high regard. But tension simmered beneath their mutual admiration. In the late 1970s, while Dylan was venturing into gospel and spiritual music, Clapton allegedly confided to a mutual producer, perhaps with the aid of a few drinks, that Dylan had lost his touch. He suggested that the torch of poetic rock was ready to pass, and perhaps, he hinted, he should be its next bearer. Though not spoken with arrogance, the sentiment didn't land modestly either. Word reached Dylan. He didn't respond publicly, but insiders say the reaction was swift. A scheduled recording session was quietly scrapped without explanation. Dylan, they say, saw through Clapton's genteel exterior, believing it to mask something more calculating. In his world, betrayal by another songwriter was far more painful than a critic's review. Next comes Joan Baez, the protest songstress whose political convictions once aligned with Dylan's, until his evolution sent them down different paths. Together, they were folk royalty, performing in unison, appearing at civil rights rallies, voicing hope and justice for an entire generation. They weren't merely duet partners, they were icons, bonded emotionally and politically. Their harmonies carried more than music, they carried meaning. But Dylan changed. At the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, he went electric. His music shifted from public anthems to personal, surreal expression. It was more than a change in sound, it was a change in spirit. Baez didn't just disapprove, she felt abandoned. Her identity was built on activism, and Dylan's artistic pivot felt like a rejection of the cause they once championed together. She urged him to return to politics in his lyrics, criticized his shift in interviews, and portrayed his transformation as artistic selfishness. To Dylan, it was personal. She had known his fears and creative doubts, yet turned them into ammunition. He never retaliated in public or song, but the silence spoke volumes. For more than 40 years, he refused to perform with her again. Asked privately about the rift, he once muttered, "She sang for the people. I was singing for myself." Then there was Lou Reed, the most surprising name on the list. A man Dylan once helped into the spotlight, only to be derided by him later. Dylan respected innovators, those who shattered molds and redefined music. They didn't intimidate him, they inspired him. But what he couldn't tolerate was mockery, especially from artists whose success owed something to the paths he'd helped forge. Lou Reed, frontman of the Velvet Underground, was one such artist. In a 1974 interview, Reed dismissed Dylan's influence, claiming he never meant anything to him. He called Dylan's lyrics hollow, mere illusions of depth, and labeled him a figure of pretentious self-importance. It struck a chord. Dylan didn't retaliate publicly. No response in lyrics, no rebuttal in interviews. Just silence. But it was the kind of silence that erased. From then on, Lou Reed disappeared from Dylan's narrative. No acknowledgments in liner notes, no mentions in memoirs or tributes. He was effectively removed. The defining moment came in the early 1990s when a Rolling Stone interviewer casually mentioned Reed. Dylan looked up from his cigarette, raised an eyebrow, and replied, "Who?" Then he smiled. It wasn't humor, it was a clean, definitive dismissal. The next name on the list brought no silence, only theatrical confrontation: Frank Zappa, the provocateur who delighted in skewering norms and figures of authority. Zappa was sharp, confrontational, and wielded wit like a scalpel. When he spoke of Dylan, he spared no mercy. In multiple interviews spanning the 70s and 80s, he called Dylan's voice a tragic accident, dismissed his lyrics as pseudo-intellectual fluff, and derided his fans as deluded followers of a false prophet. Most musicians knew better than to engage Zappa's barbs, recognizing his brilliance but steering clear of conflict. But Dylan wasn't most musicians. Years later, at a quiet party in Laurel Canyon attended by musicians and producers, a mutual acquaintance tried to broker peace between them. He nudged the two toward a handshake. Dylan stood still. He refused. The room grew tense. Zappa, unfazed, smirked, raised his drink, and quipped, "I hear silence is your best verse." Dylan didn't reply. He simply walked out and left the gathering 10 minutes later. To outsiders, it may have seemed dramatic. But for Dylan, this wasn't about artistic criticism, he'd withered plenty. It was about respect. And to him, Zappa's mockery wasn't clever. It was cruel, cutting, and unforgivable. And next comes a name even more volatile, a poet turned adversary, someone who toyed with Dylan's trust and borrowed his pain for their own art. Leonard Cohen was different. Bob Dylan held a deep, public, and profound admiration for him. At one point, Dylan even referred to Cohen as operating on the highest level of songwriting, a rare kind of praise from someone known for keeping his compliments to himself. The respect was genuine, but it wasn't simple. Beneath Dylan's reverence for Cohen lay something more complicated, a quiet rivalry and simmering resentment. Cohen's ascent in the late 1960s happened just as Dylan had stepped away from public life following his motorcycle crash. While Dylan retreated, Cohen's poetic, monk-like presence was mesmerizing audiences. As the world leaned into Cohen's mystique, Dylan's absence became glaring. Some insiders believe Dylan felt overshadowed, even replaced. Others suggest that Cohen's somber sophistication made Dylan's explosive creativity seem outdated, too impulsive, maybe even juvenile. The real fracture, however, came through an interview in the early 1970s. Cohen reportedly made an observation that Dylan's early work felt juvenile when compared to mature poets. It wasn't meant as a slight. Cohen was reflecting on artistic growth, on how songwriting evolves. But Dylan didn't take it lightly. To him, it felt like a betrayal, cloaked in intellectualism. He didn't respond with a song or public statement. But he remembered. When Cohen died years later, fans anticipated a moving tribute from Dylan, something worthy of the history they shared. Instead, he offered just 3 terse lines. No sentiment, no depth, just a distant acknowledgement. And in Dylan's silence, everything was said. Then came Michael Bloomfield, the collaborator who Dylan felt had truly sold him out. Bloomfield had been Dylan's hidden force on the groundbreaking album Highway 61 Revisited. His blistering electric guitar work, raw, instinctive, unfiltered, helped catapult Dylan into a new artistic dimension. That album was a seismic moment in music history, and Bloomfield was central to it. To Dylan, their collaboration was sacred, not just successful. But soon after, Bloomfield distanced himself. He turned down touring opportunities, skipped sessions. Some blamed drugs, Others believed he couldn't handle the spotlight. But to Dylan, it felt personal. He'd counted on Bloomfield during a creative transformation and was left abandoned. The deeper wound came years later, not through absence, but through Bloomfield's words. In interviews, Bloomfield began to downplay Dylan's role in their work, suggesting that it was he who had rescued Dylan's career by pushing him toward rock music. He even implied he was the true pioneer of folk rock, the one who gave Dylan the grit he needed. Dylan was furious. This wasn't just hurt, it was betrayal. To him, their bond had been a shared spark. But Bloomfield had rewritten their story, casting himself as the savior. From then on, Dylan never spoke of him the same way again. No more praise. No calls. No return. And then, there was the fracture that traced all the way back to the Beatles, specifically, Paul McCartney. They were cordial. They'd shared joints, compliments, even shared the stage once or twice. But real closeness never formed. There was mutual respect, but not mutual understanding. Dylan admired John Lennon's sharp edge, his darkness, his defiance. In Lennon, he saw a rebel spirit like his own. But Paul? Dylan saw him as polished, crowd-pleasing, maybe too eager to charm. He acknowledged McCartney's immense talent, how could he not, but felt McCartney was writing melodies while he himself was chasing something deeper, meaning. The final rupture happened in 1987, when McCartney casually told a magazine that Dylan's newer songs were no longer memorable. To Paul, it was a passing critique. To Dylan, it was a sting, a dismissal of his later, more intricate work. Songs filled with nuance and shadows, not catchy hooks. Dylan didn't respond publicly. No protest. No angry verses. But behind the scenes, his response was decisive. He withdrew from a planned joint tour, citing vague reasons. It wasn't the right time, he said. But those close to the situation knew. In private, Dylan was more blunt. Paul writes love letters, he reportedly said. I write scars. The rift never truly healed. In public, they remained civil. In private, they stayed distant. Dylan respected McCartney's fame, but not his fire. So, what does all this really say? These weren't just random falling outs. These were people who once stood beside Dylan, companions in rebellion, co-creators of a musical revolution. Many were mirrors of Dylan himself. Perhaps that's what made the pain cut so deep. With every fractured connection, he wasn't just turning away from a peer, he was turning from a piece of himself. The idealist. The wounded artist. The relentless truth seeker. These weren't just feuds, they were fractures of the soul. Echoes of who he was, who he feared becoming, and who he could never return to. Now, at 83, Bob Dylan isn't out for vengeance. He isn't rewriting the past to settle scores. He's simply speaking truth, quietly, carefully, and with the same haunting clarity he's always carried. So tell us, who surprised you the most on this list? And which broken bond do you think still echoes in Dylan's heart, unspoken, but unresolved? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories behind music's legendary voices.